what metadata that people have been able to create. And maybe you'll ask yourselves, why is this guy overemphasizing this? The reason why I'm overemphasizing it is it's a best practice. And if you don't do it, all the data gets useless. So try to check data in those portals. So I was try to go back to any of those portals so that we can be able to, okay, it's very good that you're getting to those portals. So I'll try to get this. So this is the RCMRD portal. And I would like you to be able to, so I'll put this portal here. The portal link, so that you can be able to access it. And I will also put the FAO portal link so that you can also be able to access it later on. So these are the two links that I would want us to be able to access. Maybe we can also add another one from Uganda so that we have a better picture for all those who are here, so you can also have a better picture. For example, there is one from map.ug. That we have, and so, for example, here we have the towns of Uganda. And once I click that, when I check the map, I don't know whether you can trust this if you are in an institution trying to make a map, and they told you make a map of Uganda, and maybe you are from World Food Program, and maybe you are just a consultant, and they tell you make one, and they give you that data set. Most likely you'll have trust issues, but then also you'll have license issues. You don't know how even to acknowledge the data set. But then also getting it may be a problem. I don't know whether it's very easy to get it. The point of contact has no phone number or email, so getting to this Geoffrey, it may be very hard. You may have to go and find the Geoffrey left, and now there is another Geoffrey, and you start having issues. So here they're telling us that we can download the metadata or the layer, so they give us the opportunity to download the layer in this case. Maybe it is, we can infer maybe it is free of charge, but that's not always the case. Whether it's free or not, we don't know. So what I'm just trying to say is that discovering data and being able to get data to be able to use for your project will definitely not be easy. And that will be made easier only if you have these one-stop gateways where you can be able to go and find this data well documented. You can be able to evaluate it. First of all, discovering is one thing, evaluating is another, to make sure that you can be able to decide and say that this data is good for me to use. Now, after that, we have the question of access. You know, you can discover, say the data is there, but then you can also be able to evaluate and say, okay, it's useful for me, but then accessing it is another problem. So we need to look at how data can be accessed. So kindly take a look at those portals, and then you tell us whether you think the data that's there is well documented, please. Can you get there? Have you been able to check?
Yeah, I checked.
What do you think about the data? Yes.
It says additional information that means it is metadata. So it has a license, the last state notified, its format is accept.
In your opinion, do you think that that data is well documented? So my friend thinks maybe it's not well documented. It's an opinion. So check other data sets, and maybe you let us know on Zoom. You can type no or yes. Do you think the data is well documented? Do you think you could do better? Do you think that you can be able to evaluate whether the data is useful once given, once you're given this do you think the metadata is sufficient enough to evaluate whether you want to use a data set? So maybe you can ask yourself that kind of question. I've sent the question on the Zoom chat. Yes?
Yeah, I was checking this one data set on this ASMR Geoportal. Data set is called Rwanda Sentinel Tool and Use Land Cover 2016. And the only information that is provided regarding how it was made, it says this layer was picked from Sentinel-2 global land cover data. They don't put any link to that data set and so on, which made me think, are there some guidelines or standards on how to best label or construct metadata for various types of data sets? For instance, if it's a land cover map, I'd expect the creator to indicate maybe satellite images have used, how the relation was done, maybe algorithm they use for classification, and some accuracy
Assessment information.
indicators at the back of this. I think that if we're evaluating someone any system, are there some guidelines on how to
Okay. So we have a colleague here. Where are you from? So we have a colleague from Rwanda here who is saying that he's seeing a land cover map of 2016, right? On the Geoportal, and then somehow that's only what he can see. He doesn't see a lot of information. And for him, he's expecting to see how this data was collected. He's expecting to see the points of contact, he's expecting to see the accuracy information or the lineage information, the quality information, but he's not seeing it. That's understandable with the kinds of portals that we have. Of course, there is something that's missing. That's why we're looking at them. we are looking at them so that we can be able to see these gaps, and as professionals, when we go back, we can be able to be the champions of how to document data. So yes, there is a standard that we're supposed to use that tells us that once you document, rather once you have data, you document it this way and that way. So we have a standard and we have tags that basically we have to use. For example, the ISO 1915 standard is the standard for documenting metadata. So that standard tells us that we must have the title, you must have the abstract, you must have the point of contact. That's basically either publisher or maybe the distributor or the responsible party. And then you must have lineage information, how the data set was created. At the end of the class, I want to show you one of the metadata sets that I've developed previously for an institution here in Uganda. So that you can be able to see that how a good data set, rather how a data set should be documented, basically. So once again, we need, I hope basically you've been able to check out the tools and being able to evaluate and see whether some of the data sets are usable for you. My colleague here, he has already indicated some of the data sets are missing metadata, and therefore they are very hard to use them. For example, it has no accuracy information, it doesn't know the satellite to use. So he's a little bit confused whether to be able to use that kind of data set or not. So let's go to the access. So how do you access this data? One of the ways how you access this data is, of course, we've already seen that upon request in the Mentimeter exercise. So that's one of the ways how we can be able to access the data. So you request and then they give it to you, or you request and pay something, and then you can be able to get this data. Some of it you just find it online, you just browse and then you just free of charge and then you're able to get it. So you just download it from the GeoPortal or maybe from sites, for example, the OpenStreetMap data that's free of charge from the geofabric.de. So that's what is existing. I just want to take you through what is existing so that you know what is existing. So when we start talking about data challenges, then you have an idea of what we're talking about. And why basically we should have services at the end. So my colleagues who are on Zoom, please let us know whether you think the data is well documented. And you can basically type 2 from what you've seen. Of course, all of you are going to have different answers. Some of you have seen data sets that are well documented, some of you have not seen. But I want to be very sure, and I just want to know whether you've been able to find data sets that are well documented. Type 2 in case you've been able to find data sets that are well documented, and type 1 in case you found any data sets that are not well documented. Two, for good documentation, you're very satisfied, everything's fine. You're very happy. And 1, you're not happy with the documentation. So please type in the rather in the chat and let us know.
Let us know.
So someone thinks it's yes. I hope it's yes. The Y means yes, I hope. So someone thinks that maybe the data sets that he has seen are sufficiently documented. Okay. Okay, just allow me to start with the FAIR principles. Now, of course, we've already seen what is existing. So we'd like to put this in the FAIR principle context. So fair data principles, like I've already told you, this is a new area that is emerging, and basically emerged from actually library sciences and life sciences. So what these people are trying to do was make sure that you can be able to access, for example, publications or access research very fast. So that's what basically they were intending to achieve. So in 2014, there was a workshop that sat in Leiden, and that was in the Netherlands. And all they needed to do was to make sure that they improve how data can be discovered and accessed. And to be able to do that, they created some kind of framework or principles. So these are not, they're not basically prescriptive, but they are just, you can use them, they're normative, and they're not, it's not like they're saying that you must use them. So they created these principles, and these principles have since spread for so many artifacts. So people have been able to use them for software, people have been able to use them for data, people have been able to use them for services, and have been able to normal files. So when we talk about fair principles, what we are meaning, these are basically a set of principles that help to ensure that data is shared in a way that basically it can be reused by humans as well as machines. So that's what basically the fair principles are all about. So once you produce your data in your institution, we should be able to make sure that we can be able to access this data. So why is fair important? By the way, what is fair? Fair is findable, accessible, interoperable. Thus, you should be able to integrate the data together, and reusable. So in other words, when you produce your data set, you need to put it in a state whereby the user can be able to find it, he can be able to access it, he can be able to use it, and he can also be able to integrate it with other data sets. So that's what basically FAIR is all about. So FAIR, well, it's a new principle, a set of principles. It doesn't mean that these best practices have not been existing. They have been existing, but now they're being put into some kind of framework that's a little bit easier to understand. So the reason why we have FAIR once again is to make sure that you can be able to find data, you can be able to access it, you can be able to integrate it and be able to make much more sense out of it. And in that case, you're using it basically. So that's what the FAIR framework is all about. So how do organizations tell that they are fair? We're going to say, rather they have resources that are fair. We're going basically to look at that aspect also. So once again, I told you that this originated from a workshop that was held in 2014. And it comes from the life sciences domain. And of course, it is intended for all data, but I've already told you that there are already research works that have applied it for services, for example, for other concerns other than data, services, processes, as well as the documents that you have. So previously, we've had communities that have come into force. In Africa, actually, we have a community on fair data. In Uganda, we have some people who have actually joined, and they're actually doing some very good work. And we also have people from Kenya, I know that, people from Ethiopia, there are people in that fair platform. And so we already have a set of metrics that we use to measure whether your institution is embracing fair principles of data management. And of course, like I've told you, this was one of the first papers by Wilkinson. So he writes the first paper in 2016, penning down all these fair principles.
and how basically they work. And they create these principles by the first group in their repository. Of course, why do we have to use FAIR once again? They're more meaningful. They provide us with a set of principles to be able to manage our data, but then also they're memorable concepts. And they have basically a natural desire for us to be able to find our data, be able to access it, be able to integrate it with other data sets, and be able to use it. Now, I'll still go back one more time to explain why this integration is very important. I've already told you, for example, if you want to plan, if institutions want to plan, your ministries want to plan, or the agencies, they need to make sure that they get data from other institutions so that they can be able to make sense of what they have and be able to achieve their mandates. And I've given you an example of disaster management. For example, the Office of the Prime Minister usually is not a custodian of data, but they use data from various institutions, for example, from the weather department or from, if it's agriculture, from the agricultural department about pests or about crop damage. So they're able to get this information and bring it together and be able to basically plan how to respond or even how to basically have prevention measures. So, of course, is it easy to understand? We are not going to claim that it is very easy to understand. So there is a survey that has been done before. And in this survey, it was the Horizon 2020 survey. And they are asking, to what extent do the following statements represent your experience using Horizon 2020 template? And then they put there something like, I don't understand what FAIR means. And then, of course, one of the results that comes out is that they say, we understand the basic principles of FAIR, but the terminology is often difficult for us to be able to grasp it immediately. Things could be better if maybe plain language was used. So these are some of the comments that have been given. Of course, compared to other principles, I would think that's really, really simpler. So how do you know your institution is fair? Is having resources that are fair? Your files, your data that is there, the GIS data, both the services that you have. How do you know that actually you're fair? So here are metrics that we use to be able to measure how fair you are. So we can measure them in two ways. One of the ways is to measure whether your resource passes or fails the test. And the other way is to measure whether you have actually reached a particular metric, whether basically your institution already can be able to test its data against a particular metric. So, for example, the first principle that we have is findability. You want to know whether your data is findable. So how do you know that your data is findable? The only way you can know how your data is findable according to FAIR principles is you must have metadata already that we talked about. If metadata is not there, then you cannot be able to find that data. That metadata must be having a unique ID so that if you created metadata for example, a roads data set, and maybe another roads data set, they will never conflict with each other. Each metadata is identified on one unique ID or persistent identifier. Now, by persistent, we mean if someone puts this metadata on the web, after 10 years, when we come to check this link for the metadata, should they find something that is not there? So the link has to be persistent. In other words, even if I search it after 100 years, it should tell me that this metadata once existed. So there are already industry best practices that we use to make sure that the link is basically persistent. And then, of course, we say that the data has to be described with rich metadata, which already we looked at. And then also that, by the way, I should say this, it is independent of any technology. It's just a set of principles that can be used for data, services, documents, or any other resource that needs to be found, accessed, and then needs to be integrated and be used. So we say that the metadata should have an identifier to the data. So you need basically to have some kind of identification to the data. For example, one of the identifiers that is used is for example, the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier. It's one of those identifiers that are used, for example, for publications. But it's very possible also to have it for data, so that those, the global unique identifier that you can be able to use to identify your metadata. And then also we say that this metadata should be indexed, for example, can be indexed in Google or in OpenAI or Zenodo or other repositories. So you make sure that that metadata is indexed so that even after so many years, of course, can be able to access it easily, find it easily. But then also after many years, since it has a persistent, a global unique URI, persistent identifier, then it can be accessed and you can always know that it's already existing or its story is existing. So in other words, I was telling you that I would be happy if one of the portals refused to work. If the portals refused to work and told you, wrote you 404, maybe the data is not there, you can be very sure that data is far from findability because it lacks that unique and persistent identifier. In other words, the URL or the link is supposed to be the unique persistent identifier, but if it's not showing, then it's not persistent. It may be unique, but it's not persistent. After so many years, it's not working. So the other bit is, the other set of principles is accessibility. So of course, when you get into your free time, maybe you can get a data set and start looking. But of course, for most of the data sets, you don't have metadata, so you don't even think about principles. So for accessibility, we need to make sure that metadata is accessible via standardized communication protocols, for example, the HTTP, and they should be free of charge. For example, HTTP is free of charge. So once you have it online, you can be able to search it and be able to get it as free of charge. Of course, when I talk about HTTP, you're like, oh, this is what we always use. Yes, it's true. The interesting thing is that other people use other protocols for particular reasons. So when you use HTTP, it is, for example, free, open, and of course, it's universally available. Now, the other thing is the authentication and the authorization. So you need to make sure that you have some way how you can be able to allow people to access the data that you have. So your organization must have this kind of protocol to ensure that people can be able to get this data. And then the other thing is metadata should be accessed even when the data is no longer available. Even when that data is no longer there, people should know that that data once existed. So in that case, you can be able to say that maybe it has passed accessibility in case of those metrics are achievable. Now we have another concept of interoperability. We're going to look at it. Maybe we're going to have a very big debate in the next session, very big one. Now, with interoperability, it's about how well systems or data can be able to integrate with each other. Of course, we shall see the different types later on. So, how well we can be able to integrate systems or information together is dictated by one of, by basically the format in which the language is accessible, rather the data is accessible or the metadata is accessible, in which the format in which you share this information. And then also the language basically of this, how the data is shared. But I'll just give you an example. Imagine you're an insurance company, and then you always compensate people who get accidents, right? Then this fella gets an accident at the river bank. So you're like, get me all the data about banks, river banks. The geographer happily gives you the data. It has bank A, bank B, bank 3, something like that. And then you have also the guy of the blood bank. They took you to Mengo blood bank maybe, and then maybe gave you some, or maybe they're trying to allocate you to Mengo or any other blood bank. So the medics give them the banks. And then now there is the money that you have to pay from the bank, the real bank of money, you know? And then also the finance guys give you information about banks. So you have 3 banks. And then you give it to this unsuspecting insurance officer, the GIS officer in the insurance domain, and he wants to combine it together and be able to make sense out of it. What do you expect? Good news or confusion? I don't know what you expect, but for me, I expect basically confusion, because these terms seem to be the same, but actually the conceptualization is different. So you need to make sure that this knowledge around these terminologies is basically clear. All of us can be able to understand these terminologies the same way. So basically this metric tells you that the way this data is written should be written, rather metadata is written, it should be written in such a way that's understandable. So you have to use a particular kind of language to make sure that this understandability is captured. And basically that's what also the vocabularies deal with. The vocabularies are basically they're implemented in the language that we just talked about. Now you need to make sure also you use qualified references. So this is a very big topic. For my work, actually, I'm just dealing with this part. And we also have the concept of reusability. Now, reusability is about, you just get your data set and you check whether, for example, the data set has a license. If it has no license, you can be very sure that machines will get confused, but even the people themselves will get confused whether to use the data or not. In fact, they'll have first look for you and ask you, do we have to acknowledge the data or not? What should we be able to do the data with? Or how far can we go? Can we even change it? So that's what this license information gives you. And of course, we said that should be richly described, and also the relevant attributes should be described so that you can be able to use it. So this is actually somewhere in the finability. And also, we talk about detailed provenance. So provenance information is information that tells you basically the process, how the data was collected, the methods, the processes basically around the data. You want to know this information so that you can be able to understand how to use it. So for example, if you collected a roads data set, you want to know whether this roads data set was collected in a context that favors your use. Maybe it could have been collected by just cars racing around with GPS or whichever. And maybe if you don't know that these were racing cars, maybe you won't know that the road is going to be not very accurate. It's not basically at the center line. So they should tell you the processes, how the data was created, the methods, how it was created, and then who created this data. You need to know all this kind of, for example, you want to know whether this person was the kind of competence he really had. So that you can start telling whether this data is actually usable or not. So this is basically about the provenance. It should be very detailed. And then it should meet the relevant community standards. So once again, I talked a lot, but I just want to say, your data has to be documented. That's what I just want to say. And the data has to have a unique identifier. And this data must have the detailed provenance information or information about how it was created. And it should have a license information and should be encoded, or maybe there must be a way how meanings of terms is basically encoded in that data. When you choose, for example, the column names that you put maybe in an Excel sheet, you must think about how they're defined. That's what I'm just trying to say. So that's basically about the FAIR principles. And maybe just to tell you, FAIR principles are not standards. They're just principles. And these are just metrics to help you. Of course, you can just go to this GitHub page, you find all the metrics. These are supposed to help organizations to be able to determine whether their data is findable, accessible, interoperable, that's you can be able to integrate it, or it is reusable. That's what basically these principles basically tell you. Now, we say that they are not standards and they don't specify a particular technology or implementation. So they don't tell you that you should use this kind of implementation and that's when they work on it. No. These don't specify any technology or particular implementation specification. And then also, of course, we want them because we want to make sure that we can be able to find our data, be able to integrate it in an infrastructure, and then be able to engage so many communities as much as possible. So for different communities, the FAIR practices are going to vary. In the GIS domain, we're actually still finding out how should we do it actually. So we're still finding out how to tune these metrics to be able to create a very robust FAIR principles for us. So that's what basically we're still at. So basically we have one thing that we have to think about. For us, we have geodata, we have the geospatial web services, we have the geoprocesses, for example. These are the concerns that we deal with in the geo domain. These are the concerns that we share. Of course, we shall see the barriers that we face, but these are the concerns that we share, and these are the concerns that we want to make findable, interoperable, and findable, accessible, and interoperable. So we need to make sure that our GIS community reorganizes itself to make sure that we can be able to have this FAIR framework work for us. So basically, for us to know what I'm talking about, you have all the data, but then you have some data that's managed, some data is not managed. That's the wire. And of course, of this managed data, this is where we have the FAIR data. So some data can be actually, you can have managed data, but it's not FAIR data. So I just want to welcome our team online. Just make sure that you get these links that you can see here. Check whether you have metadata. And I also want to show you from ArcGIS how basically we can be able to create metadata for our data sets. So maybe you can be able to check that before we get to the spatial data infrastructures. And in the next session for the spatial data infrastructures, we hope that maybe you're going to contribute a lot of since you already know now the context. So you can be able to contribute and then maybe make it a little bit lively. For now, I was just introducing you to our data and how it's managed in the GIS domain. So thank you very much. Please take your time, 5 minutes, and check this photo again. Check the metadata and let us know. Okay, so we because you've seen the geoportals, how the kind of metadata that they have. But I just want to show you the client where this metadata is found. And
tomorrow we are going to do this practical, like tomorrow is the practical day, so most of the stuff that we're doing tomorrow is practical. So the thing is that when you open this data, it doesn't make any sense unless you can be able to tell where it's from, or the metadata about this data.
So, for example, when I open this, when I open the attributes, I'm able to tell see so many things in the attributes, but maybe understanding it even is not very easy. So this is basically a data set for roads in Uganda. There are 3 data sets. I don't know whether they are right. Just like you're seeing something that I'm seeing for the first time. I don't know whether they are right. I just want us to look at them and see whether we can be able to use them. I got this from a particular database, and there are 3 institutions, but for those who are not from Uganda, there is an institution, a roads authority called Uganda National Roads Authority. So somehow, maybe I can say it's from Uganda, but I'm not sure. I'm also not sure, I'm just thinking. So the thing is, when you have these data sets, you need to make sure that you can be able to find out whether they are, this data is documented or not. So you need to find about it. So I just have to go to the catalog. So I've just gone to the catalog and then browse the layer. Tomorrow we shall be able to start with this exercise in the morning. So you don't have to worry. So you can just go back knowing that you need to have AGRC. Rather in the afternoon, not morning. So if you just click here, you'll be able to see this is where the documentation is found. So you just right click on the data set, and then you go to the properties, there are the item description. Not properties, item description. And then this is where all the properties are found. So as you can see, there is nothing. I don't know that you can use this data set, can you? I don't know. Maybe it may look very nice, but there's nothing much about this data set that we know. I don't know even when it was created. Do you know when it was? Maybe can you guess? Maybe not. I don't know. For me, I can't. Maybe some of you can. Now there is this data set here. This one, the only thing that I can tell is maybe it's from 2012, but I'm not sure. I'm also not sure. By the way, you can always edit whatever is inside here, but for now, we are not very sure. Then there is this roads data set that was created. Oh, for it, there is something that you can see. So they said that this data set, I'll put these data sets on the Google Plus, so that you can open them and check them out. But you can also get maybe 3 similar data sets from your country and then be able to check them out. Most likely you'll see something very surprising. So here at least they tell us it was created by National Forest Authority and Surveys and Mapping Department. At least you have what to start from, right? But no, it's going to ask. And then also they tell you that it has multiple roads, trucks, railways in Uganda, transport planning. So maybe you can start thinking that the context is transport planning. But, and they tell you they actually digitized topographic maps of 1970s. So you already can at least get some context. What I'm just trying to say is that this data set, which is called UG roads, and these other data sets, comparing them becomes a little bit complicated because you don't know when these data sets were produced, who produced them, what accuracy, and how basically they were produced. And even you don't know whom to contact in case you had a problem. So that's the reason I was telling you that you need to make sure that your data set is documented. If it's not documented, then no one is going to use it. It's just going to be useless after some time. So how do we, I already told you that we have a standard that we use for documentation. When I open this, you should have realized that there are tags. There are tags that they use. You must have a title, you must have a summary, you must have credits, you must have use limitations rather. And there is a possibility of you, like I've told you, being able to edit it. You can edit it and change it. Now, these tags that you see, they are called metadata elements. And I've told you there's a standard that tells us what tags appear there. So I'm going to use one of these standards that is found in this software. When I go to customize here, it's app map options. I can go to metadata. And in this case, I'll see there some standards. And these standards basically are, for example, we have the ISO 1915 standard. This is the standard that tells us how to document data sets in the GI domain. So if you ever see anything like starting with 191, ISO 191, you can be very sure that this is a GIS data set. For example, 19152 NADM, 19139 metadata specification. So there are these many standards that we can be able to use, as we shall see. So, for example, if I choose the metadata standard, which is 191, of course, for us here in Uganda, we don't have a profile. We don't know what elements we should use. But in North America, for example, for them, they have already created their tags from the standard that are useful. So if I say, okay, if I go back to this data set and go to item description, you should be able to see that the tags now increase. If I click on editing, you'll see the tags that are there. So you need to put there, when you create a data set, you need to make sure that you put the title, put the tags, put the summary, that's the abstract, put maybe the citation, how I'm going to cite your work, then the people, the contacts, the metadata details, the point of contact, the resource details, that's basically the data set. And all this will be used to evaluate whether a data set is fit to be used or not to be used for a particular purpose. So metadata allows us to be able to discover, then also to be able to evaluate whether data is useful for us or not. So that's it basically about metadata. Unless you have a question. So tomorrow we are having this assignment. It's the assignment to start with, so that you can be able to document your own data sets. You find a data set and you have to document it. And there will also be maybe a small simple report so that you can be able to document it and tell us how basically a good data set should look like. So once again, when we started this exercise, what we wanted to see is whether these data sets are comparable. So we have, you can see these three data sets once again, and I'm not sure which data set I should use just because the metadata doesn't exist. That's what I'm just trying to tell you. If you don't have metadata, forget about good GIS. You're going to do things, but they'll ask you to defend them, you can't defend them. And more so, you might end up stealing people's data without knowing. So save yourself the embarrassment and document data so that others can be able to use it. So let's have our last session. Maybe we can just break for 5 minutes and then we have our last session and we call it a day. Unless you have any question, feel free to ask. Please open up maybe for people who are muted to be able to ask questions. In case you have any question, feel free to ask. And you can also contextualize it to our country here or your country. And maybe we can be able to share our experiences. I'm waiting for questions from you. Any concerns, any observations? It doesn't have to be directly to the work, but can also be just directly to the data. And So someone is asking about quality vis-a-vis the metadata. So when we are documenting metadata, we have a section actually for quality. So there is a question that says, how do you deal with completeness of data after, for example, it's documented very well? Yeah, it can be documented very well, and the documentation, if it was documented very well, they will have told you that this data is incomplete, or this data is for a particular area. So you'll be knowing it. So what follows is how basically you deal with these quality aspects of completeness, but it's rather not a metadata kind of aspect. I don't know whether I've answered your question. It's a question of the data itself being incomplete, but it has also been stated in the metadata, and we know that, so that you can be able to use it answer your, rather to do your work. And then the other question is, if I reproject datasets and they had no license, can they be used? I maybe don't understand it, but maybe let me try to give you my understanding of the question so that you can correct me. Someone is maybe trying to ask, what if the data has no license? Can I be able to use it? So that's basically, that's the only data that's available. I don't know whether that's the question you're asking, but in case I've not gotten you well, you can correct me. The thing is that if you don't have a license, or rather license, it's not very easy for you to start thinking about using the data. Of course, sometimes we use the data, it's just like being in a bush and just pick anything, but the thing is that when there are legal issues around that data, you'll have issues. For example, we have different licenses by the Creative Commons that govern this data. There is a license that says, for example, you can take my data, but don't edit my data. Don't edit and then give it out. So if for you, you get the data and say it's incomplete, and you edit it, and then you give it out to another institution, and then you say it's yours, then there are going to be problems. So you need to look at these licenses that are available, and then be able to give your data a proper license. I have some metadata that I've created before, and for us, our license that we chose was the creative license SA, which basically says you have this data, it's public access, you can use it for all that you want to use it, but then please never change anything in this data. If you change it, then this data does not, rather ceases to come from us. Any other questions? So someone is asking the different types of licenses, but I'll try to maybe Google so that I can be able, I don't know them off yet, but I know that the creative license, I can be able to Google them or check them in my email because I've sent them to someone before, so that I can be able to tell you what licenses exist for the data. So that's one of the questions that has come up. So I'll try to Google or check in my email. So let me try to Google and see what happens. So Mkisa Geoffrey, you let us know whether we've answered your question. So a colleague asked me about these licenses, and I would like to share these licenses with you so that you can be able to go ahead and see how our data is basically licensed. When you create your data, you need to basically state your license in the metadata so that we know the reuse rights. If we don't know those reuse rights, then it becomes very hard for us to be able to use this data again. I hope we are good to go, so I can have my last 30 minutes, and maybe we have our last 15 minutes, and then we have our 15 minutes for the chat. So you can tell us what is happening. So our 5 minutes are done. Allow me to start with the spatial data infrastructure. So you already see a talk about SDIs. Now, SDIs just basically means spatial data infrastructure. Once again, I'll go back to the rationale that we had. The reason why you collect this data is not for that purpose alone, but also to be used in the future. So this data at one point in time has to be integrated together. One of the cases that I've given is spatial, integrated spatial planning. Assuming you want to build the hospital, you want to, there's this finance guy who has information about the budgets, information about accessibility, information about the political issues. So if you want to bring all this information together, you need to make sure that you have it and you can be able to access it, you can be able to find it, you can be able to discover it, so you can be able to use it, in other words. But for us to be able to do that, there is something that we need to do that's more. Okay, so we need to talk about the current situation. So in our domain, currently what is happening is that there are so many people who collect this information or data. Some of them are GIS people, others don't have a clue that they are doing GIS. For example, you find someone has a mobile phone, he's tweeting, he has no clue what is happening, but actually what he's doing is actually trying to produce volunteer geographic information data. Then we have so many applications currently. So those days would say that GIS was only ArcGIS. Nowadays, with GIS, there are so many applications. You just need the knowledge. And of course, so many products, we have a lot of formats. And then also, there's a lot of duplication. And even accessing the data across departments within one institution is a little bit complicated. I know of institutions whereby it's the same institution, but the different departments cannot share the data. So they have to go to the field to collect the same data set. And that means money. So of course, for them, they look at it in terms of activities. So you have an activity, you have to basically have funding for it, and people can go to the field and pick data. But these are two departments that can never, ever agree that actually they're collecting the same data. And this data is not reusable. So the biggest problem that we have is we have a difficulty finding, accessing, integrating, and using this data from multiple data producers. So that's the basic problem that we have. So now we want to hear from you. There is another Mentimeter link that you have in your drive. I'm going to put on the chat. And you just have to tell us the challenges that you face in your institutions. So I try to state some few challenges here, but I don't think they really capture everything. but I think that different countries have different challenges. So would like to hear from you so that you can be able to tell us the challenges. So Arthur, please help and post the link in the rather than the drive. So I think it should be this. So there is this link, just get there. And tell us what you think the barriers for data sharing are in your company. In other words, what I'm just trying to say, assuming you wanted data, how would you be able to access data in your country? What challenges would you face? So my friend, you just go to an institution and want data. Or maybe you have a GIS project you want to access data or find it. What are some of the challenges that this find it as far as sharing the data is concerned, between institutions or between persons or individuals? That is simple. So let us know the barriers for data sharing, why data sharing has been a problem in your country or in your institution or at your workplace. Why do you think you have a problem with data sharing? So let us know and let us learn from each other. So something is coming. So our colleagues are already posting something. That is good news. Yes, so these are some of the challenges that our colleagues have. So as others are coming in, so people think that we have a problem of lack of metadata. So they see their data and the data has no metadata. And then also they think that the files are so large that they think that there is completeness. So talk about accuracy issues. There is the legal and the policy issues that are surrounding this kind of, the data sharing. Then people are talking about inadequate knowledge. So this I take it to be like technical capacity, the bureaucracies. They're talking about heavy data to be shared on the internet. Then they're talking about, I think, the technical, whether they really have the funds or the capacity to be able to share this data. And then also the quality of the data in terms of the spatial resolution, standards, and then the poor quality. I mean, it's also a quality thing, the ignorance, it's also capacity issues. And then someone is talking about security agencies. I don't know whether you understand that point. I don't know whether you can think about it. So maybe it's thinking about maybe not all data is shareable because of security concerns. But of course, the metadata can be there. So they can tell you, for example, we have security installations, but they don't give you the data. Then someone is talking about poor cartography. So it's trying to say that the quality just gets poor data. Then some data sets are commercial. So something to do with how you access them, the mode of sharing, lack of metadata, the reference systems. There's an issue with the reference systems. And in case you have any peculiar example that you could share with us on voice, you can always raise up your arm and then join us and be able to share. So these are some of the issues that basically our colleagues have in there. And there's so many, there's so many. As you can see, these are just few of them. But if people start telling you the problems that basically they're going to share, rather access information from other sister institutions, then maybe you can also get the impression that actually all is not the best. I tried to check in one of the reports that we had in Uganda. So there's a report that was done. And then they checked, they asked, they tried to inquire. They did actually some sort of research, find out what are the challenges of spatial data sharing. And of course, the challenges that we had, sometimes even we don't have the digital data sets. Some of the data sets are still like analog. You just go to an office, they tell you, you simply don't have it or even it's spoiled. What they tell you that it's not analog form, you can't be able to access it, it's outdated. And then the other issue that was there is the standards. We don't have already standards for profile standards for us to be able to import our data sets. So those standards are not there. And then, of course, this basically complicates data sharing. And then the other one was the institutional arrangement. So you know that we can have data, but if our institutions don't agree with each other, we cannot be able to share data. So if, for example, ministry, for us, we have a Ministry of Lands here, and or the Federal Ministry of Lands in Ethiopia, and maybe the ministry in charge of roads, if they never, or the authority in charge of roads, if they never agree with each other, then compensations become a problem. Expropriating, land expropriation becomes a problem, because you need to pay people if you have a new project. So these people need to get the cadastral parcels so they can be able to see who's affected, and then they can be able to do some kind of land expropriation. So we have a problem of institutional arrangements. We've not yet gotten to that point whereby we can be able to sit together and say, okay, we can share our information with some kind of understanding. And then also the availability of skilled human resource. So we don't have enough properly trained resource to be able to implement such an infrastructure, or maybe a big infrastructure for sharing data effectively. Now, the other thing is we have inadequate technology. You've had some talking about the internet is not good, the files are large. So it's basically technical issues. Either the capacity is a problem who can be the human resource, but also it can be the technology that's involved in sharing data. And then also we have the policies, of course, we're talking about the institutional arrangements. So we have no policy already that is there that allows us to, rather that guides basically how we should be able to share information amongst our colleagues. So someone is asking a question. Are there standards to guide data completeness? I have not seen any standard that tells us that they get rather get data completeness, but I know that we have standards that allow us to be able to record and be able to share data and have also data in a quality way. So for example, the metadata standard gives us a tag that tells us how we should define the quality information about the data set. But it doesn't tell you how to achieve completeness. It just tells you that you can be able to state the level of completeness, but not how to achieve it. Then also there's lack of funding. My friend here was saying that many donors come. Then when the project is done, everything is done. It stops there. So that's a big problem that we have. We have a problem of lack of funding, and of course also the will. So there is the will to collect the data or even update it. So that people, rather than some institutions that actually have this will or to maintain the current data sets that they have. So how do we solve these problems? The problems that you've told us and the problems that are being that we found out for our country here. Of course, for every country there are different problems, but most likely we share common problems. Some of them are common and others are different. So how do we solve these problems? To solve these problems, we need to have an infrastructure, just like a road infrastructure, a reliable environment, that's what I'm trying to say, that allows us to be able to share data between institutions. So we must have this kind of infrastructure, and this infrastructure for us, we call it a spatial data infrastructure. It allows us to be able to share information between institutions. And of course, if we have it, then we shall be able to make sure that we have this data maximized in different institutions. And of course, we have some bit of dissemination and access in a better and faster way. Now, just to give you an impression of what if you don't have such a kind of system, what happens? So what happens when you don't have a data infrastructure? So I just have a small picture. This picture, by the way, was presented in 2011 at the same conference. And this picture basically shows you these two sides. They are building a road, but somehow they never come to integrate with each other. And so if you don't have this spatial data infrastructure, this is what basically we can get to. You have activities in government that are being done, but once you try to connect them together so that you can be able to make sense of them, nothing is possible. Or you have these kinds of things. Somehow you never connect with each other. So that's the price that you can pay if basically you don't think about the data infrastructure. I don't know whether that is very clear. Now, what is a data infrastructure? Or what is this spatial data infrastructure? Basically, what it is that you have these institutions, but they must have a coordinated series of agreements, institutional agreements, or even they have some kind of coordination in terms of the standards that they should use to be able to hold this data or maintain this data or manage it. And they should be having policies to ensure that this data can be shareable amongst themselves with ease. And the whole purpose of doing this is to make sure that this data is shareable and it's used for a purpose other than what it was created for. In other words, it should be reusable. That's what basically an infrastructure is supposed to achieve. So we have several initiatives. Here we have already the GEOS in Africa, and so many initiatives that basically allow us to be able to get to this data infrastructure. And also at the country level, for us, we've had so many initiatives. And in the interest of time, maybe we can drop just the link to what these initiatives have been, and then maybe you can be able to access them later on. So a data infrastructure allows us to be able to discover, evaluate resources, and be able to use them for the purpose that we're intending to use them. And we've said the price that you can pay for a data infrastructure, not having a data infrastructure, is this. You have these two. I've just used a metaphor of a bridge. I imagine Kenya wants to connect with us for our railway. So you can imagine standard gauge railway. And we're using different standards, different coordinate systems. When we reach Malaba, we may not be able to connect. We may have issues. But then also I imagine that maybe we can be able to connect. We may have other barriers like the policies. Maybe they don't allow us to be able to connect with each other. So we have to think about them. Now we have different types of data infrastructures, SDIs. We have the global data infrastructure. I've been able to provide you with these global portals that I sent you the Zoom link, or maybe that I showed you in the slides. And basically, that was showing you an interface for accessing this data from a global perspective. So you'll see there's something like GEOS or the FAO metadata catalog that we're using. And at a regional level, you can also have, for example, the Inspire from the Europe, for example. For us in Africa, we don't have something. So regional center is trying to do for us something. So there's something that is, that's the initiative that is there for us here in East Africa. But in Africa, I don't know. At a national level, you can also have these initiatives, or even at a local level. For example, you can say for us, we have our data infrastructure at a local level. So what do you see of a data infrastructure? What is tangible that you can see? You basically see that metadata catalog, maybe a set of policies that are existing, and the people. That's what basically you see. So those photos that you're seeing are just a component of an SDI, a data infrastructure. So there are some videos here that we shall see. One just to show you what, for example, the Inspire is all about in Europe. So that you can be able to see. I don't know whether I can run this video. Okay. They can use geospatial data, such as groundwater, transport networks. So I try to European countries can use geospatial data, such as groundwater, transport, connection, and use and air temperatures. And each has its own specific way to describe the state. But the environment doesn't start at all. Our rivers go through multiple countries, which share countries. In times of crisis, the right choices being made for
use the law, recreation, and agriculture. Governments and local authorities need to have data and timely information to help predict the impact on their community. But data is not always readily available. All the data is created using different standards. Therefore, hundreds of experts from across Europe have worked together to define common standards to describe and to share the spatial data. Examples are European legislation, SPAC, into infrastructure, sharing spatial information between public bodies in Europe. Spire defines common standards for 34 spatial themes, including energy, transport networks, protected sites, elevation, population distribution, energy resources, utility and government services, and natural risk services, to name a few. In some cases, information is collected for the first time. When this happens, the Inspire standards help the information. Inspire our spatial data from different countries to share information through an online portal. Users can be confident until they get a deeper part. Public authorities will take more informed decisions.
So that is basically about the Inspire portal. So we try to get maybe to another small video. So that is basically at the regional level. That's one for the different for the different countries in Europe. That's a regional portal. But now we can also have regional, rather a national infrastructure. So we can also have it at a district level or maybe at a lower local level, community level. So now at the country level, I just want to show you an initiative that has also been done.
Imagine if you lived in a world with no mountains, no trees, no buildings, no streets. What kind of world would it be? It would be a world where geospatial information does not exist. Geospatial, where geographic information is the data and information related to describing a place on the surface of the earth. It is essential to how government works. Businesses are hiring, heritage is preserved. But accessing that data is never easy. And oftentimes that data was out of date. Now, thanks to one of Abu Dhabi's e-government initiatives, Abu Dhabi Spatial Data Infrastructure, which facilitates the sharing of geospatial data by over 50 government, academic, and private institutions, you can access the most up-to-date geospatial data via an easy-to-use interactive map on the Abu Dhabi Geospatial Portal. AGRC, which recently received international recognition by winning the world's leading e-government organization's outstanding prize, makes it easier for government agencies to be more efficient in providing better services. Real estate developers and businesses to better plan for their growth, utilities to better manage their networks, and environmentalists to help maintain our biodiversity. And that's just a few of the many benefits AGRC offers. Perhaps most importantly, the Abu Dhabi Spatial Data Infrastructure is teaching us to think spatially as we move forward with our ambitious mission of transforming Abu Dhabi into the city of the future. To access the Abu Dhabi Geospatial Portal and learn more about ADSDI, visit sdi.abudhabi.ad today.
So these are just initiatives that exist at the national level. That's the, for example, Abu Dhabi. At the regional level, I've already showed you the Inspire. At the community level, maybe we shall see one from some of you. So maybe you'll be able to tell us what has been done at the community level. So that's what basically, these are SDIs, but it's a different typology. So according to scale, basically. So what are the components of an SDI? The spatial data infrastructure. So the components are, you need to have a legal framework. And there must be a policy. I know that currently what is happening is that there is an information policy that's being developed in our country. I know that there's something that's being developed currently. And in other countries, I don't know whether there is something, but I know that there are some countries here in Africa have already seen some of their policies. They have, for example, pricing policies, some of them have they have an information sharing policy. So I've seen some of those policies, at least in the eastern part, that some countries will meet. For us here in Uganda, we don't have. I don't know whether you have in Uganda. Do you have a policy for sharing information?
Yeah, we don't call it a policy, we call it National Information Communication Infrastructure. And actually, there are provisions inside that. It's a 5-year document strategy, and inside there are provisions for creating the spatial data infrastructure. We have the second installment now. It's 19 years, but that has not yet realized for different reasons. But
so in Rwanda, apparently they have this initiative running, just like how I think it's how the Inspire started also. So they start the initiative and then they have years. So they have steps of maturity. And saying that there is this document that has these steps of maturity defined. So you must have a legal framework, you must have an information policy, you must have people and institutions which basically have the data, they're able to work with this infrastructure. You must have standards that basically govern how data should be encoded, how metadata should be encoded, but then also you must have standards that govern, for example, the access, or basically we call it basically the network services. So basically, discovery, access, and processing. You've already seen this. This is the geoportal that you had. This is the place of the data infrastructure. So maybe, I'm going to state it maybe in another way so that you can be able to understand it. These are the components you must have. You still remember we talked about data, we divided it into fundamental, thematic at the beginning. I intended to do it so that once you get here, you don't get lost. You know what metadata is, you know what data is, and you can divide it between fundamental and thematic data sets. So that was the intention of us starting it the other way around. And then we have standards, and I'll just give you a snapshot of what the standards are like. And then we have the network. This network services, we already dealt with it. That's why I was telling you about the geoportals. So for now, you already know the geoportals, where you can be able to discover, access the data. But then also, you know the concept of metadata, you know the concept of data. And now there must be standards to make sure that this data is encoded in the same way so that you can be able to understand it. And then we must have the legal, we must be having the, okay, these are not questions. We must have the legal framework and the information policy. So maybe to state it, how, when you look at it, what do you see basically? What does a common man interact with? What you see is basically a catalog like this metadata catalog. But behind it, we say that there is data or metadata. So the metadata has to be standardized. And this is managed by people and owned by institutions. And there must be a legal framework or an information policy. So you get this, and then you can be able to search for your data sets, discover them, and evaluate whether they're useful to be able to be used. The concept I always use is for us in our own nature, long time ago, maybe for those who from here. Long time ago, you had the book, the main library, and you'd find there a catalog. So there would be cards of this nature, cards that are just here in this drawer. And these cards had the name of the book that you wanted, So if you check through the cards and phone, maybe there is a book that you want and you're interested in it, you pick the card, and then you go to the counter and then ask for that book. Then they give you the book. What basically you're doing, you actually get this card with basically metadata that you're picking. Then once you're sure where to get the book from, then you can go and pick it from the section where you're supposed to pick it. So these cards also had the amount of data that was there was standardized. So there's a way these cards were made. So in different universities, they look different, most likely. So here we had our own standard. So those are the standards I'm talking about of what should be on the card. Now, that metadata is what has been converted into this kind of thing. So this photo that you see here, this website sort of like, is the same as this analog method. They are the same, they're literally the same. Only that we say that there must be the people, the institutions, then there must be the legal and information policy, then there must be data to which this metadata is referring to. That's what I'm just trying to say. And then we have said also that as a person, when you come to interact with this, for example, this website, what happens on the right-hand side, we have the interaction diagram. The user finds the user interface. This is the user. This is the user interface. So the user comes to this portal and then basically interacts with the portal, and then is able to find a gateway, rather a gateway. So this gives him like an access to these many networks that exist. So in other words, if you have maybe Africa here, we have so many countries. Each country can have its own portal, but then, or its own catalog. When you come search, you have this one-stop gateway. When you search, you're able to access, they tell you that these catalogs exist, and you can choose one of them, and then you get to Uganda, for example, and even you drill down the other catalogs that exist. And then be able to get to the metadata that has spatial data. Now, with this metadata, there's a possibility that you can accept the portal, allow you to be able to download it. So that's basically the concept of the data infrastructure. But to be able to do this, you must have a supporting environment. And the environment is, the policies have to be ready. You must have the data itself, you must have the personnel, you must have the standards so that you can make this happen. Otherwise, it won't happen, even if you're so enthusiastic. So that's what basically a data infrastructure is all about. Okay, so maybe we should almost wind up so that we can be able to have a starting point. Tomorrow we want to start with the practicals and then also work with web services. The reason why we are learning all this is to make sure that we understand where to find data or find these services. The next day when we talk about services, you know now what data is. When I explain services, then maybe you'll see the difference. Now, of course, you have the concept of interoperability. When you're sharing data between institutions, there are some barriers. We said we have concerns in our GIS domain. We have data, services, we have processes. Some of them can be business processes, the way you handle, you do your things. For example, if you wanted to get a leave in an institution, there is a process that you must follow. This process must be, if you're working with another institution and you're seconding staff there, this process must be interoperable. It must connect with each other. Otherwise, you may never be able to have it work. So interoperability is basically the ability of two or more systems to be able to come together and exchange information. And that information must meaningfully be used. Now, when you're sharing information, for example, data between institutions, the first barrier that you can have is that the machines themselves may refuse to connect with each other. Or even the formats may not open up in that same rather than another computer. So you try to send the data from one computer to another, And then you end up realizing that it cannot actually be sent. Just because the protocols are different, the software could be different, the APIs are very different. We call that technical interoperability, but we can thank God. This kind of interoperability barrier or this kind of barrier in sharing or coordination is somehow sorted because technology is now changing. You know? We already have robust standards. It's very easy to solve. Now, the other problem that you can have is very possible for you, maybe just assuming that technically everything is fine. You may be able to share, but institutions have policies that say our data cannot be shared. So in that case, you have organizational barriers, or you have political barriers, or there can be barriers in terms of ownership, privacy, and of course, responsibility in terms of the data. So that is basically a barrier brought about by organizational issues. There is a possibility that the organizational issues, let us assume they're also sorted, everything is fine. Technically, we can send the file and you get it. The organization accepts everything is perfect. There may be another problem. You can receive the data and the data cannot be usable because of the meanings in the data. I already gave you an example of the bank, where you have the three banks, the bank of money, the bank of blood, and the bank of the river bank. When you bring the data together, then it becomes chaos. Now we call that one semantic interoperability. The fact that the conceptualizations, there's a conflict in conceptualizations or even in meanings or terms. So when you bring data together, you get problems. For example, someone can call a footpath, you can call it a track, you can call it a tertiary road in another data set. So when you bring these three data sets together, then you get problems. So these are barriers that we have when we are sharing information and we have to think about them. The first one is very easy to solve. The second one is basically not very easy to solve, but it can be solved. The third one is about the willingness. So most of us work with these last two, the organizational and the semantic interoperability. And that are some of the barriers that have made us fail actually to reach this dream goal of an infrastructure. So I've already talked about these things in the FAIR principles, that you need basically metadata, you need standards, authorization, copyright, the policy framework, the incentives to cooperate. The business models have to be right to be able to share this information. You must have an infrastructure, you must have networks, that's the Geoportal, and the shared best practices, as well as support for multiple formats. So I was talking about standards. What I meant was that there must be an agreed way how things should be done. So there must be, of course, this is, we have standards that are legal, we have standards that are de facto. By legal, I mean the law says you must do it how it says it. But de facto, that these standards that you find everybody is using are broadly accepted. But there's no law that says that you should use them. For example, use shapefiles, but no one tells you that there is a law that says that you must use shapefiles. In fact, there are more than 200 vector formats. But some are use shapefiles, all of you. The de facto standard broadly accepted. And these standards basically are produced by the OGC and also the ISO TC 11211 working group. Now, whenever you see ISO 191, you can be very sure you're dealing with the geographic information systems. When you see ISO 191, whichever is added, just know that you're dealing with geographic information systems. And of course, for us, we have the National Standardization Body. I think your countries also have a National Standardization Body. So what happens is that there's a way they are related with each other. You have basically the working group here, the TC, 211, the ISO working group that develops these standards. But then also you have the OGC, the Open GIS Consortium, that basically develops implementation specifications. Now, these specifications, they tell us how do we implement. So we're going to implement Geospatial web services, but you're going to see that there is a way how we implement them. As a GIS expert, you know how to access data when they tell you this is related to Geospatial services. So these implementation specifications are introduced under the joint agreement with ISO TC 211, ISO standard, rather, the National Standardization Organization. And they're introduced there, and then they can be made standards that everyone can be able to use. Now we have our National Standardization Organization. So these guys are supposed to look at both the ISO TC and the OGC consortium specifications, and then they're supposed to make a profile of these standards. And then this is what is introduced in the national standardization. Now, where is our problem? Our problem is OGC have done some work, ISO TC have done some work, but our national standardization organizations have not sat down to look at these big standards and profile them, cut them, and say, okay, we just need a section of this standard to work for us. So that has not been done in many countries. So that's why basically we are lacking. So that's why, for example, someone will say, we have no metadata standard. There is a standard, surely. And of course, but the standard that he's talking about is not what is required. There is always a standard, but it's not what is required. I don't know whether I've confused you or maybe making sense, but so that's how basically these standardization organizations work with each other. These are some of the few standardizations that are there, all the standards that are there. So for example, we have the reference model, which is ISO 1901. We have the metadata, which is here. As you can see, the 1915, which are used tomorrow in the metadata sets. And then there is the data quality standard. So it basically tells you how data quality has to be ensured. So Christine, I think that's what you're asking. And then also we have for example, there are so many standards still. ISO 19152, for dealing with the land administration, LADM. So we have so many standards that can be used. And when you start doing your work, you have to make sure that you choose the right code standard. I always have this common story that I tell my participants or students, because it has happened to me. So I don't want you to have the same problem. When I just finished my master's, the reference is just some colleague of mine gave me a job. And he told me, confidential. So I did the work. At the point of presentation, I told him, I want to present because it's not the time. He said, no, just present. But somehow I refused. And one day, a colleague comes and says, brother, the client says, I need the data. So they came and picked the data. I went to them, show them how to open it. They sent the data to France. Now, of course, I told them, this data want to be accepted. They said, no. What is important is the data. So I think the French people never understood it. But the guy had done really good work. So they rejected the project and the people were kicked out. They re-advertised. They gave the project to someone who knew the same people who did the work. So all we needed to do was to have this work incorporated in ours, knowledge the other people, and then also be able to add metadata. It was accepted. So the problem was just basically metadata. What I'm just trying to imply is that if you don't have the right standards, you develop a database without the right standards, you implement web services without the right standards, you can be very sure that beyond you, an amateur will only accept it. But the GIS expert will never take that work. Because in any case, you may not even understand it. So that's basically it for our class, but I'll just leave you with this small video so that you can be able to understand.
IMO Good morning, class. We are doing fine, moderator. Thanks. In today's discussion, we will be talking about spatial data infrastructure.
So I tried to make sure that
Spatial data infrastructure and SDI as it relates to today's world.
Wow, that's great. I'm happy to be part of today's class.
I want everyone to pay attention and ask questions where it is necessary. Spatial data infrastructure, SDI, is defined as a framework of policies, institutional arrangements, technologies, data, and people that enables the sharing and effective usage of geographic information by standardizing formats, protocols for access and interoperability.
Moderator, what is the goals of SDI in today's world?
The goals of SDI are 2. 1. Reduce duplication of efforts among governments. 2. Lower costs related to geographic information while making geographic data more accessible. 3. Increase the benefits of using available spatial data. And 4. Establish key partnerships between states, counties, cities, academia, and the private sector.
Moderator, should SDI be part of e-government initiatives?
Yes, of course. SDI should be seen as part of wider e-government initiatives because of its roles it plays in our society. Again, infrastructure for spatial information is the European community. Inspired is a European Union EU directive that came into force on May 15, 2007, binding EU members to establish a spatial data infrastructure for the internet that facilitates the sharing of geographic information in a standardized way. Furthermore, Inspire addresses technical and non-technical issues ranging from standards, organizational and procedural issues, and data policies to the creation and maintenance of electronic services.
Wow. Thanks, moderator, for your time with us in today's discussion on SDI and GIS world. We promise.
So thank you very much. This is basically the end of my introduction as far as the presentation is concerned. But I'll be very glad I will stay along just to listen to your comments and discussions. So in case you want to engage in the discussions, very okay, I'm still around. And but as far as the presentation is concerned, I'm done. So tomorrow, basically, I expect you to. Tomorrow we're going to start the practicals. It's totally practicals until the last day. So the next session, so we need you to have ArcGIS and Quantum GIS. Maybe I'll put the links for the Quantum GIS. You can just install one of them. It should be able to work. So I would like to show you how to document the data sets, but then also I would like to show you how to consume existing web services from the different portals. So that's what basically I want to do tomorrow in the afternoon. So it will purely be practical, and of course, we'll start with a recap of what we've done today. So thank you very much. In case you have any comments, questions, please feel free to air them out. So I'm waiting for questions in case you do have some questions. Yes, there's a question here.
Maybe clarification. We emphasize on general platform which deals with general clarification or discussion. But a platform like the GBI, Global Web-Based Information System, it's a platform that provides access to specifically by investing data, but that investing data also has a special component because for current data, for instance, you coordinate the location where you're going something. So can we consider this as special?
First of all, the portal itself is not a spatial data infrastructure. The portal is a component. A geoportal, that's a specialized portal. It's a component of the spatial data infrastructure. Remember, we said that the components, you have people, institutions, you have data, the metadata, you have the standards, you have the network services, that's the geoportal. And we have the legal and the policy tester. But I've not seen what the portal looks like for me to start determining. I don't know if it has metadata. I don't know if
everything there, all those components there. The global organization with membership in many countries, Uganda is member. Africa actually presented with many here in Nigeria, and also the node to get in the so it's a global thing. They have all these alignments, policies, and so on. Then there is a portal, how you can share data there, all this stuff. That is basically
so it's just like data infrastructure for the biodiversity. Yeah, it's very possible to have a particular domain. Well, I've not looked at the portal, so I can be able to confirm or deny. It's just that I just know that these components have to be all there. There must be metadata, there must be sample data, there must be the people, there must be the institutions, there must be some kind of coordination. Thank you very much. So, if there are no questions, we can close the session and we meet tomorrow. But please, let's make sure that we have our AGRC or maybe bottom AGRC and still send emails to remind you, because tomorrow we just want to do practicals. Today we've had a lot of talk. So tomorrow we want to do the things. So thank you very much.